Marriage is built on trust. At least, that's what I used to believe before my world started unraveling. Rachel and I had been married for 7 years. Long enough to feel like I knew her better than anyone else, but not so long that I was blind to the subtle shifts in her behavior. Rachel was a psychologist with a growing list of private clients. She loved her work. Her passion for understanding people's inner worlds was one of the things that had drawn me to her in the first place. But lately it felt like that passion had shifted focus. It started with small, almost unnoticeable changes. Rachel had always been meticulous about her appearance, but in the past few months, her attention to detail had intensified. She'd spend extra time in front of the mirror before heading to work, perfecting her makeup or redoing her hair. Her wardrobe evolved too. Gone were the modest blouses and slacks she used to favor, replaced by fitted skirts and heels that clicked purposefully against our hardwood floors as she left the house. At first, I chalked it up to her wanting to feel more confident. Why shouldn't she? I thought. She was a successful, attractive woman in her early 30s, and I admired her drive. But then, her behavior began to deviate in ways I couldn't ignore. There was one client in particular, a man named Logan. I first heard about him casually during one of our dinner conversations. Logan had a breakthrough today, Rachel had said, her voice tinged with excitement. It's so rewarding when you see someone really start to confront their past. I didn't think much of it at the time. Rachel often talked about her clients in general terms, never anything too specific, just enough to give me a glimpse into her world. But as weeks turned into months, Logan's name started cropping up more frequently. He's been coming to see me twice a week now, she mentioned one evening as we cleaned up after dinner. He's got so much potential, but his trauma has really held him back. The way she spoke about him felt different, more personal. There was a warmth in her tone that I didn't recognize, an admiration that made my stomach twist slightly. But I didn't say anything. I trusted her. Or at least I wanted to. The real turning point came one Friday night. Rachel had a standing rule about not taking late appointments. She valued her evenings at home, and so did I. But that night she came home well past 9, her face flushed and her hair slightly out of place. Sorry I'm late, she said, slipping off her heels. Logan had a lot to unpack today. We ran over. I nodded, trying to push down the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. You don't usually schedule sessions this late, I remarked casually. She waved me off. It was a one-time thing. He's been making so much progress, and I didn't want to cut him off when he was opening up. Her explanation made sense, but something about her demeanor didn't. There was a charged energy about her, like she just stepped off a roller coaster. I noticed the faint scent of cologne clinging to her blouse, an unfamiliar fragrance that wasn't mine. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Rachel slept soundly beside me. The thought hit me like a punch to the gut. Was she lying to me? Over the next few weeks, my unease only grew. Rachel started coming home late more often, always with the same excuse: Logan needed extra time. She was more protective of her phone too, keeping it face down on the counter and taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. I started noticing other details, small but unsettling. The way she'd linger in front of the mirror before leaving for her sessions. The new lingerie I found in her drawer, lacy and provocative, pieces I hadn't seen her wear for me. Still, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. Rachel was my wife, the woman I loved. She wouldn't betray me. Would she? One night, as I sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The pieces were all there, scattered and incomplete, but enough to suggest a picture I didn't want to see. Was I losing my wife? Or had I already lost her? They say intuition is a powerful thing. At first, I ignored mine, brushing off the gnawing doubts in the back of my mind as paranoia. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how hard you try to bury it. Rachel was becoming a stranger. The changes in her weren't just about her appearance anymore, they were deeper, more insidious. She'd always been warm and attentive, but now there was a coolness to her, a sense that she was only half present when we were together. "Is everything okay?" I asked her one evening as she sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, startled, as though I'd caught her in the middle of something. "What do you mean? You seem distracted lately," I said carefully. "Like your mind is somewhere else." Rachel laughed lightly, but it felt forced. "I'm fine, really. Work has just been demanding. You know how it is with my clients, they rely on me." Her answer should have reassured me, but it didn't. There was a hollowness to her words, a sense that she was reciting lines from a script. Over the next few weeks, the distance between us grew. She started leaving earlier in the mornings, claiming she had paperwork to catch up on before her sessions began. On weekends, she'd disappear for hours under the guise of running errands or attending networking events for her practice. I tried to stay busy, throwing myself into work and hobbies, but the cracks in our marriage were impossible to ignore. The intimacy we once shared, both emotional and physical, was slipping away. Our conversations became stilted, our nights together infrequent and perfunctory. One evening, as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I decided to broach the subject again. "Do you ever feel like we're off?" I asked, keeping my tone light. Rachel raised an eyebrow, pausing mid-bite. "Off? What do you mean?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "It just feels like we're not as connected as we used to be. Like something's changed." She put down her fork and leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "We've been married for 7 years, Nathan. It's normal for things to settle down. Not everything has to be fireworks all the time." Her response was so dismissive, so rehearsed, that it left me speechless. I wanted to argue, to tell her that this wasn't about fireworks, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded and let the conversation drop. But my suspicions only deepened. I started paying closer attention, noticing the little things that didn't add up. Like the way she'd smile at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, or the muted phone calls she'd take in another room. Once, I caught a glimpse of her screen as she swiped a notification away. Logan's name. I couldn't deny it any longer. Something was going on between Rachel and her client. The thought made my stomach churn, but I knew I couldn't confront her without proof. If I was wrong, I'd be accusing her of something unforgivable. And if I was right, well, I wasn't ready to face that yet. So, I started watching. Waiting. I combed through her calendar, looking for inconsistencies in her schedule. I noted the days she came home late, cross-referencing them with the times she mentioned Logan's appointments. The patterns were subtle but unmistakable. I even found myself tempted to go through her phone, but Rachel was always careful to keep it locked or out of reach. Instead, I turned to more subtle methods. I started checking her car, looking for anything out of place. Once, I found a receipt for a fancy restaurant tucked into the passenger seat, a place we'd never been together. The date matched one of her supposed networking events. The final straw came one Sunday afternoon. Rachel had claimed she was meeting a colleague for coffee to discuss a joint project. But as I drove past the coffee shop on my way to the hardware store, I saw her sitting on the patio, leaning in close to a man I could only assume was Logan. His hand rested casually on her arm as she laughed at something he said. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, fighting the urge to pull over and confront them then and there. But I knew I needed more than just an accusation. I needed irrefutable evidence. That night, as Rachel slept soundly beside me, I made a decision. If she was betraying me, I would find out. And when I did, there would be no coming back. By the time I woke up the next morning, the decision had crystallized in my mind. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. Ignorance wasn't bliss, it was torture. I spent the day thinking about my next move. Confronting Rachel without evidence wasn't an option. She was sharp, adept at turning any conversation to her advantage. If I accused her without proof, she'd play the victim, painting me as paranoid or insecure. No, I had to be smarter than that. I started with her car. That evening, after Rachel went to bed, I slipped outside under the cover of darkness. The cool night air did little to calm my nerves as I carefully searched her vehicle, using the flashlight on my phone to examine every crevice. In the glove compartment, I found a receipt for a hotel just outside the city. It was dated 2 weeks ago, a night she told me she was working late to catch up on paperwork. The charge wasn't for a room, just a meal and drinks, but the implication was clear. I felt the bile rise in my throat as I imagined her sitting across from Logan in a dimly lit bar, their conversation laced with flirtation. I pocketed the receipt and went back inside, my mind racing. This was something, but it wasn't enough. I needed more. The next day, I called an old college friend, Eric, who worked as a private investigator. We hadn't spoken in years, but he owed me a favor, and this was the time to cash it in. "Eric, I need your help," I said, my voice low as I paced the garage. "I think Rachel is having an affair." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he replied. "That's heavy, Nate. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" "I don't have a choice," I said, gripping the phone tighter. "Can you do it?" Eric agreed, and within a few days he'd installed a GPS tracker on Rachel's car and given me an app to monitor her location in real time. He also recommended a small voice recorder that I could slip into her purse. "It's voice-activated," he explained. "You'll hear everything." I hesitated at first, feeling like I was crossing a line. But then I remembered the way she'd laughed with Logan at that coffee shop, the way she'd come home late with flimsy excuses and the faint scent of another man's cologne. If she was betraying me, I deserved to know. The first few days of surveillance were uneventful. Rachel's car went to and from her office as expected, with no detours or suspicious stops. The voice recorder, tucked neatly into her purse, didn't pick up anything incriminating. I began to wonder if I was overreacting, if my suspicions were the product of my own insecurities. But then came Friday. Rachel had told me she was meeting a colleague for lunch, but when I checked the GPS tracker, her car was parked at a boutique hotel downtown. My chest tightened as I stared at the blinking dot on my phone, my worst fears inching closer to reality. I waited, pacing the house, checking the app obsessively. 2 hours later, the dot moved again, this time heading back toward her office. When Rachel came home that evening, she was as calm and composed as ever, as though nothing had happened. "How was lunch?" I asked casually as she unpacked her bag in the kitchen. "Oh, it was fine," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "Just the usual shop talk." I clenched my jaw, nodding as though I believed her. Inside, my anger simmered, but I knew I had to stay calm. The voice recorder would reveal what really happened during her lunch meeting. That night, as Rachel showered, I retrieved the device from her purse and plugged it into my laptop. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the audio files, each one a potential bombshell waiting to explode. And then I found it. A conversation, muffled but unmistakable. "I can't keep sneaking around like this, Logan," Rachel's voice said, low and sultry. "It's exciting, but risky." "You worry too much," came the reply, a deep male voice that had to be Logan's. "Your husband's clueless. He'd never suspect a thing." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My worst fears were no longer fears, they were facts. Rachel was cheating, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. As I listened to their exchange, my hands curled into fists. I heard them laugh, their voices dripping with familiarity and intimacy, as though this had been going on for months. Maybe longer. I stopped the recording, unable to listen any further. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. I knew I had to confront her, but not yet. Not like this. If she could lie to my face so easily, I needed to catch her in a way she couldn't deny. For now, I had to play the part of the oblivious husband. But inside, I was already planning my next move. I had the proof I needed, Rachel's voice, Logan's smug reply. The betrayal was real, and the evidence was irrefutable. But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. I wanted more. I needed to catch her in a way that left no room for excuses or manipulation. If this marriage was going to end, I wanted it to end on my terms. Over the weekend, I played the part of the dutiful husband. I helped Rachel with errands, cooked breakfast for us, and even suggested we watch a movie together. She seemed more relaxed than usual, as though the weight of her secrets had made me predictable in her eyes. She probably thought I was clueless. She didn't realize I was waiting for her to slip. On Monday morning, she left the house in a rush, her usual routine of tailored skirts and a perfectly painted smile intact. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I checked the GPS tracker. She was headed to her office, which matched her schedule for the day. I couldn't act on instinct alone. I had to wait for the right moment. That afternoon, I reached out to Eric, the private investigator. I want to know everything about this guy, I told him. Where he works, where he lives, who he really is. Eric didn't ask questions. By the next morning, I had a file in my inbox. Logan Bennett, 38, recently divorced, self-proclaimed entrepreneur. He worked in real estate development, but the file suggested his projects were sketchy at best, overpriced properties, dubious investors, and a history of failed ventures. He was handsome, though. I could see how Rachel had fallen for his charm. And then I saw the detail that set my blood boiling. He'd booked a suite at the very same boutique hotel I'd tracked Rachel to on Friday. According to Eric, Logan had been staying there on and off for months. It was his go-to spot for private meetings. By midweek, I was ready to make my move. I knew Rachel had her weekly late session with Logan on Thursday, and based on her patterns, I suspected it wouldn't end in her office. I called Eric and arranged for him to tail her after work while I prepared my own part of the plan. That evening, I couldn't sit still. I kept checking the GPS tracker, watching as Rachel's car sat idle outside her office. The voice recorder I'd planted in her purse earlier that day would capture everything, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to see it for myself. When the tracker finally showed her car leaving the office around 8 p.m., my heart started pounding. She didn't head home. Instead, she drove straight to the boutique hotel. Eric called me minutes later. She's here, he confirmed. Logan's car is in the lot too. They just walked inside. My vision blurred with rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to storm in and cause a scene. I wanted them caught in the act, with no way to deny it. I drove to the hotel and parked a safe distance away. Eric had already gone inside, posing as a guest to keep an eye on their movements. He texted me updates as Rachel and Logan moved through the lobby and disappeared into the elevator. They're in room 514, he wrote. You want me to stay? No, I replied. I'll handle it from here. I waited, letting the minutes tick by, every second sharpening the knife of betrayal lodged in my chest. When I finally walked into the lobby, I felt like a man on the edge of a precipice, teetering between fury and devastation. At the front desk, I flashed the fake ID Eric had provided, a little trick he'd used in cases like this before. The clerk barely glanced at it before handing me a duplicate key to room 514. I made my way to the elevator, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I reached their floor, I paused outside the door, my hand trembling as I slid the key into the lock. Part of me wanted to turn around, to leave and pretend I didn't know what was happening on the other side. But I couldn't. I had to see it through. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside. The sounds hit me first, low murmurs of laughter, followed by Rachel's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. Then came the unmistakable creak of a bed. My stomach churned, but I forced myself forward. The scene unfolded in slow motion as I reached the bedroom door, left slightly ajar. There they were, tangled together in the sheets, completely oblivious to my presence. Rachel, I said, my voice cold and steady. Her head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock. Logan scrambled to cover himself, his confidence evaporating in an instant. Nathan, what are you doing here? She stammered, her face flushing with panic. I didn't answer. I simply held up my phone, the camera still recording. I hope he's worth it, I said before turning and walking out. The sound of her calling my name followed me into the hallway, but I didn't look back. Driving home from the hotel, I could barely see the road through the fog of rage and humiliation. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my thoughts raced in every direction. Part of me wanted to go back, to demand answers, to unleash every ounce of anger I felt. But the other part, the rational part, knew it was over. Rachel had shown me who she truly was, and there was no undoing that. When I got home, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. The silence was deafening, yet it was also comforting. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't playing the role of the oblivious husband. The facade was gone, and now I was free to face the truth head-on. I poured myself a drink, the amber liquid burning my throat as I downed it in one go. My phone buzzed on the counter, Rachel's name lighting up the screen. I ignored it. Then came the texts, one after another. "Nathan, please let me explain. It wasn't what it looked like. I love you. Please call me." I didn't reply. What could she possibly say that would change what I'd seen with my own eyes? Her lies, her betrayal, it was all laid bare now, undeniable and unforgivable. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. Or maybe she had never been real at all. The next morning, I woke to find Rachel's car in the driveway. My heart sank, knowing I'd have to face her sooner or later. Sure enough, the doorbell rang minutes later. I considered not answering, but a part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. Maybe I needed to see how far she'd go to justify her actions. When I opened the door, Rachel stood there, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked disheveled, a far cry from the composed woman who had walked out the door the day before. "Nathan," she began, her voice trembling. "Please, can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in but keeping my distance. She walked into the living room, wringing her hands as she turned to face me. "I know what you're thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not what it seems." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what it seems. I saw you, Rachel. I heard you. So don't insult me by pretending there's another explanation." She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I made a mistake," she admitted. "A horrible mistake. But it didn't mean anything, Nathan. You have to believe me." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with that man, and you have the nerve to tell me it didn't mean anything?" Her tears flowed freely now, but I felt nothing but disgust. She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "You don't get to play the victim here, Rachel," I said coldly. "You destroyed this. You destroyed us." For a moment, she looked like she was going to argue, but then her shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't know what I was thinking," she said, her voice breaking. "I was stupid, selfish. I felt trapped, Nathan. Like I needed to feel alive again." Her words hit me like a slap. "Trapped?" I echoed. "You felt trapped in the life we built together? In the marriage we promised to cherish?" She nodded, her eyes filled with shame. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said. "But I'm begging you, Nathan. Please, give me another chance. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Her desperation was almost pitiful, but it wasn't enough to sway me. The damage was done, and there was no going back. I couldn't unsee what I had seen or unknow what I now knew. "I need time," I said finally, my voice devoid of emotion. "Time to figure out what's next. But don't think for a second that I'm just going to forget about this." Rachel nodded, wiping her eyes as she moved toward the door. "I'll do whatever you need," she said. "Just please don't give up on us." As she left, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The house was quiet again, but the weight of what had happened lingered in every corner. I knew the road ahead would be messy and painful, but one thing was certain: I wasn't going to let Rachel or Logan get away with this unscathed. Rachel's departure left the house eerily quiet, but my mind was anything but still. Her pleas, her tears, they played in my head on an endless loop, but I couldn't let myself soften. Not now. Not after everything I had uncovered. She had made her choices, and now I had to make mine. That morning, I reached out to Eric again. I want to escalate this, I said, my voice firm. Rachel's begging for forgiveness, but I know she hasn't told me everything. And I'm not going to stop until I have the full story. Eric sighed on the other end of the line. You sure about this, Nate? It's going to get ugly. It's already ugly, I replied. I need the truth. And I want Logan exposed, too. Eric agreed to dig deeper. Meanwhile, I started planning my next move. I knew Rachel would try to cover her tracks, to manipulate the narrative and regain control. But I wasn't going to let her. This time, I would be the one pulling the strings. That evening, I called Rachel and told her I needed more time. Stay at a hotel for now, I said. I'm not ready to talk. She didn't argue. She probably thought giving me space would work in her favor, that I'd miss her and come crawling back. But I wasn't the same man she had been fooling all these months. I had seen too much, heard too much. My trust in her was shattered, and I wasn't about to rebuild it on her terms. While Rachel was out of the house, I started digging through her things. I searched her laptop, her drawers, and even her bathroom cabinets. I found little pieces of evidence that painted a damning picture: more hotel receipts, text messages she hadn't deleted, even a second phone hidden in a shoebox in the back of her closet. The messages on the second phone were exactly what I expected: intimate exchanges with Logan, plans for their next rendezvous, and even cruel remarks about me. He's so clueless. I feel alive when I'm with you. I can't wait until our next session. Each message was a knife to the heart, but they also fueled my determination. Rachel and Logan weren't just betraying me, they were laughing about it. Mocking me. That was something I couldn't let slide. The next day, Eric came through with more details about Logan. His real estate deals weren't just shady, they were borderline fraudulent. He owed money to several investors and had been dodging legal action for months. It seemed Rachel wasn't the only person he was deceiving. I decided to use this to my advantage. I started documenting everything: the texts, the hotel receipts, even the recordings from the voice recorder I'd planted in Rachel's purse. My goal wasn't just to confront them, I wanted to ruin them. If they thought they could toy with my life, they were about to learn otherwise. That weekend, I reached out to a divorce lawyer. She was sharp, no nonsense, and sympathetic to my situation. When I showed her the evidence I had collected, her expression hardened. "This is more than enough to file for divorce on grounds of adultery," she said. "You could also go after Logan for alienation of affection, depending on the laws in your state. I want to make this as painful for them as possible," I said. "Legally, of course." She nodded. "We can do that. But you need to be strategic. Don't tip your hand too early." Her advice was exactly what I needed to hear. I wasn't just going to confront Rachel, I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of her actions. The trap was almost set. I had one last piece of the puzzle to put in place. Using the second phone I'd found in Rachel's closet, I sent Logan a message pretending to be her. "Let's meet tomorrow at the usual place. We need to talk." He replied almost immediately. "Of course, babe. Can't wait to see you." I felt a surge of satisfaction as I read his response. This was it, the final move. I would meet him in person, expose everything, and make sure he understood exactly what he had destroyed. As I closed the phone and set it aside, a sense of clarity washed over me. I wasn't just going to reclaim my life, I was going to show Rachel and Logan that betrayal had consequences. And they were about to face them head on. The plan was simple, but it carried weight that felt anything but. The message I'd sent from Rachel's second phone had set the wheels in motion. Now, all I had to do was show up and finish what they had started. The next day, I arrived early at the usual place, a secluded booth in a trendy cafe just outside the city. I chose a seat with a clear view of the door and waited. My heart pounded as I sipped my coffee, the seconds ticking by like hours. At exactly noon, Logan walked in. He scanned the room, his confident demeanor on full display as he searched for Rachel. He had that kind of charisma that probably worked on clients, and clearly on my wife. But as I watched him from across the room, all I could see was the smug arrogance of a man who thought he could take what wasn't his. He spotted me just as I stood up and made my way toward him. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face, but it was quickly replaced by feigned indifference. "You must be Nathan," he said smoothly, his tone far too casual for the situation. "And you must be Logan," I replied, my voice steady but sharp. "We need to talk." He glanced around, likely considering walking out, but I gestured to an empty table in the corner. "Sit," I said. It wasn't a request. Reluctantly, he sat down, his confidence faltering as I took the seat across from him. I placed my phone on the table, the screen lighting up with a still image from one of the recordings I'd saved. Rachel and Logan in that boutique hotel room, tangled in each other's arms. Logan's smirk faded instantly. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice low. "I want you to know the mess you've created," I said. "You thought you could sneak around with my wife and get away with it. But you were wrong." His eyes darted to the screen, then back to me. "Look, man, I didn't." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Don't lie to me. I've seen it all. I've heard it all. You and Rachel have been making a fool out of me for months. But here's the thing, Logan, I'm done being the fool." He leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. "So what? You're here to threaten me? Get revenge?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm here to make sure you understand what's coming. Rachel isn't the only person you've been lying to, is she? Your investors, your clients, they don't know the kind of man they're dealing with." Logan's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my business." "I know enough," I shot back. "And I'm prepared to share everything I've found with the right people. You've been playing a dangerous game, Logan, and it's about to catch up with you." The color drained from his face, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uneasy. "What do you want?" he asked again, this time with less bravado. "I want you to disappear," I said. "From Rachel's life, from my life. If I ever see or hear from you again, I won't hesitate to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are and what you've done." He opened his mouth to protest but stopped himself, likely realizing there was no point. "Fine," he said finally, his voice flat. "You win." "No, Logan," I said, standing up. "I didn't win anything. You and Rachel made sure of that." Without another word, I walked out of the cafe, leaving him sitting there with his guilt and his shame. The confrontation had gone exactly as I'd planned, but it didn't bring the sense of closure I'd hoped for. When I got home, I found Rachel sitting on the couch, her face pale and drawn. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "You talked to him?" she said softly. I nodded. "I did. And he's out of our lives. For good." She swallowed hard, tears brimming in her eyes. "Nathan, Don't," I said, cutting her off. "Don't apologize again. Don't try to explain. I've heard enough lies from you to last a lifetime." She flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I was past the point of cushioning the blow for her. This was the bed she had made, and now she would have to lie in it. "We'll talk about the next steps soon," I said, my tone cold. "For now, I need space. Don't expect me to forgive you, Rachel. And don't expect me to forget." I walked upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth was out, and the first stage of my plan was complete. But the battle wasn't over, not yet. The days that followed felt like the calm before a storm. Rachel tiptoed around me, her once fiery demeanor replaced by cautious meekness. Logan, true to his word, or perhaps to his fear, disappeared completely. But even in his absence, the damage he'd caused lingered like a shadow over my life. I wasn't interested in reconciliation. There was no repairing the trust Rachel had shattered, no rebuilding the foundation she'd destroyed with her lies. What mattered now was setting things right for myself and making sure she understood the full weight of her betrayal. I met with my lawyer the following week, presenting her with the mountain of evidence I had gathered. She was impressed, if not a little shocked. "This is more than enough to ensure you get what you deserve in the divorce," she said. "That's the goal," I replied. "I'm not leaving this marriage with anything less than what's mine." The legal proceedings began quickly. Rachel was served the divorce papers on a Monday morning. She called me in tears, begging me to reconsider, to work things out for the sake of what we once had. But there was no turning back. I had already made up my mind. When we finally sat across from each other in the lawyer's office, Rachel looked like a shell of the woman I once knew. Gone was the confident, ambitious psychologist I had fallen in love with. In her place was someone who had been broken by her own choices. "I never wanted this," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake, Nathan. A terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you." I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. Love isn't just a feeling, Rachel. It's a commitment. And you broke yours." She didn't argue. She couldn't. The evidence was stacked against her, and there was no denying the truth. The divorce was finalized within months. I kept the house and most of our shared assets, thanks to the prenuptial agreement Rachel had once insisted was unnecessary. She moved into a small apartment across town, her once flourishing private practice now struggling to recover from the scandal of her affair. Word had gotten out, thanks, in part, to some well-placed whispers, and many of her clients had moved on to other therapists. As for Logan, his real estate business imploded shortly after I sent a detailed report of his shady dealings to the state regulatory board. Last I heard, he had left the city, chasing another opportunity, somewhere far away. Good riddance. For a while, I struggled to adjust to life after Rachel. The house felt too big, too quiet, and the memories of our life together haunted me in unexpected ways. But over time, I began to rebuild. I focused on my work, reconnected with old friends, and even started seeing someone new, a woman who valued honesty and loyalty above all else. Looking back, I realized that Rachel's betrayal, as painful as it was, taught me something important. It showed me the strength I didn't know I had, the resilience to face the truth and move forward. And it reminded me that trust is fragile. Once broken, it can never truly be repaired. Rachel reached out to me once, months after the divorce, asking if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, more out of curiosity than anything else. When we sat down, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "For everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know." I nodded, feeling no anger, no bitterness, just a strange sense of finality. "I hope you find whatever it is you were looking for," I said. "But I can't give you what you lost." As I walked away from that cafe, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The chapter was closed, the story finished. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.